It's funny how silence can scream louder than words. I remember that night so vividly. The way the clock ticked too loud, the way the roast in the oven had gone cold, the way my hands trembled even though the room wasn't cold. He sat across the table, his eyes fixed on his glass of wine, swirling it gently like he was afraid to look at me. After 40 years of marriage, I could read his silence better than most people read words. And that night, it wasn't just silence. It was a storm waiting to speak. I'd spent the whole day planning that dinner. 40 years, that's no small thing. I'd ironed the good tablecloth, the white one we bought during our honeymoon in Charleston. I'd lit the candles, even put on the pearl necklace he'd given me when our daughter was born. I thought we were celebrating us. But he had something else to say. "Evelyn," he began, his voice low, almost trembling. My name sounded strange coming from him. Tired, heavy. I smiled, pretending not to notice the weight in it. "Yes, dear?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something like pity in his eyes. Not love, not anger, just pity. That's when my heart started to sink. Slowly. Like an anchor being dropped in still water. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. His fork clinked softly against the plate. I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "You sound like you're about to confess a crime." He didn't laugh. My hands froze on the napkin. "John, what's wrong?" He took a deep breath. "You deserve to know the truth, Evie." The way he said it, soft, almost gentle, made my stomach twist. I whispered, "The truth about what?" He looked down, his thumb rubbing the edge of his ring, the ring I'd placed on his finger 40 years ago. And then, without meeting my eyes, he said, "I didn't stay with you because I loved you. I stayed because I felt I owed you." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard right. What?" I managed to whisper. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You gave up everything for me. Your youth, your family. You stood by me when I lost my job, when I failed. I couldn't walk away after that. But love left a long time ago." My mouth went dry. The smell of the overcooked roast filled the air, sharp and sour. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the crackle of candle wax dripping. Everything was too real. I wanted to say something, anything, but my tongue felt heavy. My fingers clutched the tablecloth, twisting it like I could hold on to something solid in that moment. He kept talking, his voice distant, like he was narrating someone else's story. I thought maybe it would come back. That if I just stayed, if I just kept going, maybe I'd fall in love with you again. But it never did. "I'm sorry, Evelyn." "I'm so sorry." "Sorry." That word echoed in my mind until it didn't sound like a word anymore. I stared at him, trying to find the man I'd spent 4 decades beside. The man I'd raised children with. The man whose shirts I'd ironed, whose coffee I knew by heart. 2 sugars, no cream. But all I saw was a stranger sitting under warm light, confessing something that shattered 40 years of my life. My throat ached. Then, all this time? Every dinner, every holiday, every "I love you," was it all pretend? He swallowed hard. Not pretend. Just duty. Duty. That word hit harder than any slap. I don't remember standing up, but I did. The chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound. My knees shook. I wanted to scream, to throw the dishes, to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt inside, but all I did was whisper, "I gave you my whole life, John." He looked at me finally, eyes full of regret, but no tears. "And I gave you mine, Evelyn. I just didn't give you my heart." For a moment, everything stopped. The candles flickered. The clock ticked. My heart broke quietly, the way glass breaks under a blanket, soundless but final. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, it was raining, the kind of soft rain that smells like wet earth and lost time. The reflection of the two of us shimmered faintly on the glass, me standing, him sitting. 2 ghosts of a marriage that no longer existed. My hand pressed against the window pane. Cold. Damp. It reminded me of the first time he'd held my hand, 40 years ago, when we were young and foolish and thought love could conquer everything. But love had packed its bags long ago, and I never noticed. He said something, I don't even remember what, but I just stood there, hearing the rain, feeling the heaviness in my chest grow until I couldn't breathe. I whispered, "Why now? Why tell me this after all these years?" His answer was quiet, but it pierced me. "Because I can't keep lying to you anymore. You deserve someone who loves you for real. I can't be that man, not anymore." I turned slowly. "You think I deserve the truth? After 40 years, this is mercy to you." He didn't respond. He just looked down. And suddenly I saw everything. All those moments I had brushed aside. The late-night calls. The cold goodnights. The trips he took alone, claiming it was business. They weren't random. They were signs. Signs I had ignored because I believed in the story I wanted us to be. I had been blind, but love had made me proud of that blindness. My knees weakened, and I sank into the nearest chair. I pressed my hands together. They were shaking so badly, I could barely keep them still. The smell of the burning candle wax mixed with a faint hint of rosemary from the roast. I thought about our wedding day. The church bells. The way he'd smiled at me under the soft summer sun. I had believed that smile would last forever. And now, in the quiet of our kitchen, that same man sat across from me, confessing that all along, his heart had belonged somewhere else. I don't know how long we sat there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. But the only sound was the rain against the window, steady, patient, as if mocking my tears. I finally whispered, "Is there someone else?" He looked startled.
No.
"There's no one else. There hasn't been for years." That should have comforted me. But somehow it didn't. Because loneliness is worse when it lives inside love. My hands found the edge of my wedding ring. It felt heavier that night, like it carried 40 years of illusion. I turned it slowly, the metal cutting into my skin. He got up quietly, walked to the sink, and poured out his untouched wine. Then he said, almost to himself, "I never wanted to hurt you." I didn't answer, because sometimes silence is the answer. He left the table, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The bedroom door closed softly behind him. I sat there, staring at the flickering candle until it died. The room went dark. Only the clock kept ticking, steady, relentless, counting the seconds of a life that suddenly felt foreign. I whispered to no one, 40 years, and I never really knew you." The words came out like a sigh, fragile and final. I felt the first tear roll down my cheek, then another. My body shook quietly, my heart cracked open in a way it never had before. I picked up his plate, still full of untouched food, and carried it to the sink. My fingers brushed the warm ceramic, his fingerprints still there, fading under the running water. Love leaves traces, even when it's gone. As I washed the dishes, I caught my reflection in the window, tired eyes, trembling lips, and a woman who suddenly looked older than she did that morning. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. I didn't know who I was without the story of us. But that night, under the sound of the rain and the ticking clock, I realized something I had never dared to think before. Maybe it was time to stop being someone's wife and start being myself again. If you've ever felt a heartbreak like this, please hit the like button. I just need to know I'm not the only one. You know, when I close my eyes, I can still smell the lilacs from that spring afternoon. The one when I first met John. The air was warm, the kind that wraps around you like a promise. I was 22 then, and the world still felt wide and forgiving. I had just moved to a small town in Virginia to work as a school librarian. It was supposed to be a temporary stop, a stepping stone before life really began. But life has a funny way of making its own plans, doesn't it? I met him at the grocery store of all places. I was standing in front of the shelf trying to decide between 2 brands of coffee. Back then, a decision like that felt important. I remember his voice behind me, deep, kind, with that southern calm. He said, "If you're looking for the stronger one, go with Maxwell House. It'll keep you awake through anything." I turned around and saw this tall, confident man in a plaid shirt and dusty jeans, smiling like he already knew me. His hair was dark then, a little messy, and his eyes, oh, his eyes had that spark that makes you forget what you were doing. I laughed, a little embarrassed. Do you always give unsolicited coffee advice to strangers? He grinned. Only to the pretty ones. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. That's how it started. Two people laughing over coffee in aisle 6. A week later, he showed up at the library. Said he'd come to return a book, though the one he handed me looked brand new. He stayed that afternoon, sitting at the far table, pretending to read while sneaking glances at me. I'd never had someone look at me that way before, like I was something worth paying attention to. Within months, we were inseparable. He'd pick me up from work in his old blue pickup truck, the one that rattled every time it hit a bump. We'd drive out to the lake, park by the edge, and talk for hours about everything, dreams, fears, plans. He wanted to start his own construction business someday. I wanted to travel, maybe write a children's book. We were poor but happy. We didn't have much, but it felt like enough because we had each other. He'd bring me wildflowers instead of roses. I used to press them between the pages of my favorite novels. I still have some of them, faded now but still holding a trace of their scent. Our wedding was small. Just close friends, a white dress I bought on sale, and a borrowed veil for my sister. John's mother baked the cake herself, lemon with buttercream frosting. We danced barefoot in the backyard under string lights he had hung that morning. I remember him whispering in my ear as we swayed to the music, "You'll never have to worry about anything, Evie. I'll take care of you always." And I believed him. God, I believed every word. The early years were good, not perfect, but good. We lived in a tiny rented house near Main Street. The walls were thin, the pipes groaned every winter, and the roof leaked whenever it rained. But we filled that house with laughter. He'd come home late, covered in dust from construction work, and I'd be waiting with dinner. Sometimes he'd pull me into his arms before even taking his boots off. We'd dance right there in the kitchen, the radio humming an old love song, the smell of garlic and bread filling the air. I used to think that was what love meant, those small, ordinary moments. But slowly, things began to shift. It wasn't sudden. It was the kind of change you only notice when it's too late. It started with long work hours. He said he needed to take extra projects to get ahead. I didn't question it. I just made sure he had dinner waiting, a warm bed, a home that felt like comfort. Then came the silences. Not angry ones, just distant. He'd sit in his chair after dinner, staring at the TV but not really watching. When I'd ask about his day, he'd smile faintly and say, "Just tired, Evie." Tired. That word became his answer for everything. One night, I found a letter on his desk. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was from a woman named Clara, someone from his old job. She'd written, "I miss our talks. You always understood me better than anyone." I stared at that sentence for a long time. My hands shook. My first instinct was to confront him. But when he came home, exhausted, with those same kind eyes, I couldn't. I told myself it was innocent. I told myself I trusted him. That was my first mistake, mistaking silence for peace. A few years later, we had our daughter, Emily. She was our miracle, small, pink, loud, and perfect. I thought her birth would bring us closer again. And for a while it did. John was gentle with her, softer than I'd ever seen him. He'd rock her to sleep, hum off-key lullabies, and brag to everyone about how she already looked like him. I remember one night I was nursing Emily and he stood by the doorway just watching us. He said quietly, "You make everything look easy, Evie." I smiled, exhausted but happy. "That's because I love you." He kissed my forehead, but I noticed something in his eyes that night, something distant, almost guilty. I brushed it off. You don't want to see cracks when you've built your life around someone. The years went on. Life got busier, messier. Bills, diapers, work. Love became more like teamwork. We were partners, not lovers, but partners who made things work. Every now and then, he'd surprise me. A Sunday breakfast in bed. A road trip to the mountains. I'd think, there it is. The man I fell in love with. But those moments never lasted long. Once, during our 10th anniversary dinner, I told him, "Do you ever wonder if we've changed too much?" He looked at me for a long time and said, "We're supposed to change. That's how we survive." I nodded, but his words left a chill. Because I didn't want to survive with him. I wanted to live. When Emily left for college, the house grew too quiet. I tried to fill the silence with hobbies, gardening, volunteering at church, baking for the neighbors. But John grew quieter. He started sleeping in the den more often, saying the bed hurt his back. Sometimes I'd hear him talking softly on the phone, his voice low, gentle, the way it used to be with me. When I asked who it was, he said it was work. Always work. I wanted to believe him. After all, that's what wives do when love starts to fade. We hold on to faith, even if it's made of paper. And yet, there were still moments that felt real. Like the Christmas we got snowed in. The power went out, and we sat by the fireplace wrapped in blankets. He told me stories from his childhood, and I laughed until tears rolled down my cheeks. He looked at me then and said softly, "You have the prettiest laugh, Evie." I'd forgotten how much I love hearing it. For that one night, I believed him again. I leaned against his shoulder, the fire crackling, the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air. I thought maybe love could be rebuilt, that maybe we weren't broken, just lost. But the next morning, he was distant again. Cold coffee. Barely a word. It was as if that warmth had never happened. I learned to stop asking questions. Some silences are safer unbroken. As the years passed, I began to see how life had worn us down. Not through fights or betrayal, but through quiet neglect. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but kills love slowly, day by day. I tried to fix it in my own ways. Little love notes in his lunchbox. His favorite meal on Fridays. Soft touches on his arm as he read the paper. He'd smile sometimes, but the smile never reached his eyes. Once, I asked him directly, "Are you happy, John?" He looked surprised. "Of course I am. Why would you ask that?" I forced a smile. Just wondering. But I saw it in his face. That hesitation. That flicker of something unsaid. And deep down, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. I remember our 40th anniversary. Emily had flown in with her kids. We had balloons, cake, laughter. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. When they toasted us, John held my hand and smiled for the cameras. His grip was firm, but it felt rehearsed, like an actor remembering his lines. That night, after everyone left, we sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by empty glasses and leftover cake. I looked at him and said softly, "We made it 40 years. He nodded. "Yeah, we did." But there was no warmth in his voice. No pride. Just weariness. I reached for his hand. He let me hold it, but didn't squeeze back. Something inside me shifted then, a quiet realization I wasn't ready to face. For years, I had thought love was something you kept alive. But now I understood, love could die and still leave its shadow behind, tricking you into believing it's there. I didn't know it at the time, but that night, as the clock ticked and the candles flickered low, something changed, though I didn't know it yet. It was a Saturday morning, one of those slow, quiet ones where the sunlight filters through the curtains and everything feels soft, harmless. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, whisking eggs for breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the room, the same coffee he'd been drinking for 40 years. John was sitting at the table, staring out the window. His hands were clasped together, not resting, but gripping, like he was holding something in. His wedding ring gleamed faintly in the light. "Do you want toast too?" I asked. He didn't answer, just kept staring. "John." He blinked, looked up. "Huh? Oh, yeah. Toast's fine." His voice sounded wrong. Hollow almost. I felt a shiver crawl down my neck, but I brushed it off. 40 years of marriage. You learn not to overreact to moods. You just keep going. After breakfast, he went to the porch. I could hear him pacing, slow, uneven steps against the wood. I wiped my hands on a towel and followed him out. He was leaning against the railing, head bowed, like the weight of the sky was pressing down on him. You all right? I asked softly.
He didn't look at me.
Evie, we need to talk. My stomach dropped. Those words, we need to talk. I'd heard them before, but never from him. Never in that tone. What about? He turned then, and his eyes, they weren't cruel, but they were tired. So, very tired. About us, he said quietly. I smiled nervously, trying to keep it light. Well, that's a big subject for a Saturday. He didn't smile back. Something inside me cracked a little. We sat down on the porch swing, the one he built himself 30 years ago. It creaked as we sat. I could hear the wind moving through the trees, the sound of kids playing somewhere down the street. Life going on while mine was about to stop. He rubbed his hands together, took a deep breath. Evie, I don't even know how to start. My heart began to race. Start with the truth, I whispered. He nodded slowly. The truth, then. There was a long silence before he spoke again. I didn't stay with you all these years because I was happy. I felt my breath catch. I must have misheard.
What?
He looked away. I stayed because I owed you. Because I felt guilty. I blinked. Guilty? For what? He swallowed hard, his throat moving like it hurt to speak. Because I ruined your life, Evie. You could have had more. You could have been more. But you chose me, and I took everything you were and made you small. I stared at him. The words didn't make sense. I shook my head. That's not true. I loved. I know, he cut in, voice cracking. And I didn't deserve it. The air between us went still. He looked down at his hands. Do you remember Clara? The name hit me like a brick. My fingers went numb. I could barely nod. She wasn't just a friend, Evie. The world tilted. I felt the blood rush to my ears. My hands started shaking. Don't say that. He couldn't even look at me. It was years ago, before Emily was born. I stood up. My knees almost gave out. John, please. I didn't plan it, he said quickly. It just happened. We were working late one night, and I... Stop. My voice was trembling. Please stop. He kept talking anyway, like he had to tear the poison out of himself no matter how much it hurt me. It only happened once. I swear. But I couldn't live with it. That's why I stayed. All these years, I stayed because I thought I owed you that much. I pressed a hand to my chest. It felt like someone had carved my ribs open. So, what? Our marriage was a punishment? A penance? No. Then what was it, John? I snapped. My voice cracked mid-sentence. 40 years of my life, my love, my everything, what was it? He looked at me, tears glistening in his eyes. It was me trying to make things right. I laughed, a bitter, broken laugh that didn't sound like me. Right? You call this right? You call lying to me for 40 years right? He reached out for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I whispered. Don't touch me. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock through the open window, marking every second that my world was falling apart. He whispered, I loved you in my own way, Evie. I looked at him. This man I'd built a life with, grown old with, trusted more than anyone, and all I could see was a stranger. I don't even know who you are, I said quietly. He lowered his head.
I'm sorry.
I should have told you long ago. I wanted to scream.
To break something.
But instead, I just stood there, trembling, my heart shattering in silence. After a long minute, I said the only thing I could manage. Get out. He froze. Evie. Just go, I said again, voice breaking. Please. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. He walked back inside, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. A minute later, I heard the door close behind him. And then there was just me, standing on that porch with the wind on my face and 40 years of love collapsing inside my chest. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the coffee to grow cold, for the birds to stop singing. When I finally went back inside, the house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too big. I walked through each room like I was visiting someone else's home. His jacket still hung by the door. His mug was in the sink. His glasses sat by the Bible he never really read. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. I went to the bedroom, our bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror across the room. My face looked pale, older somehow. I whispered, 40 years for guilt. The tears came then, slow, soundless, endless. I thought of every birthday, every anniversary, every I love you we'd ever shared. Were they all built on pity? On guilt? My mind kept circling one thought like a vulture. If he hadn't felt guilty, would he have left me? That question tore me apart. I don't remember much of that afternoon. Just fragments, sitting by the window, clutching my wedding ring, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking, the world moving on. Hours passed before I finally found the strength to stand. I walked to the den, where he kept his things. Papers, photos, old letters. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof that he'd loved me once, or evidence that it had all been a lie. That's when I found it. A small, yellowed envelope tucked in a box marked bills, 1992.
My name wasn't on it.
But hers was. Clara. My heart pounded. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated years after he claimed the affair had ended. Her handwriting was neat, careful. The first line made my vision blur. I'm glad we agreed not to tell her. She doesn't deserve to know. It would only ruin what little peace she has left. I felt the room spin. My hand shook so hard the paper crinkled. Stay with me till the end. What I found next still keeps me awake at night. There was more. I've thought about you every day. I know you feel trapped, but at least she's taken care of. You've done your part. I'll always love you. My knees gave out. I fell to the floor, clutching the letter to my chest, choking on a sound I didn't recognize as my own. He hadn't stayed just out of guilt. He had stayed with her in his heart, every single day. I saw flashes of all those years. The silences, the distance, the way he'd sometimes stare into nothing. I thought he was tired. I thought he was thinking about work. But now I knew he was thinking about her. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the lie that my love had meant something to him, when all along it had been an obligation. That night, when he came back home, I didn't say a word. He walked into the living room and stopped when he saw me holding the letter. The color drained from his face. Where did you find that? He whispered. I stood up slowly. My voice was quiet, but steady. So it wasn't guilt, was it, John? You stayed because you were a coward. Because you couldn't live with the truth or without her. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I gave you my whole life, I said. And all you gave me was a story I wasn't even part of. He took a step forward. Evie, please. I held up my hand. Don't. He stopped. I looked at him one last time, really looked at him, and I felt something strange. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just emptiness. The kind that comes when something dies quietly inside you. I want you out by morning, I said softly. He didn't argue, didn't cry. He just nodded, like a man finally facing the consequences he'd postponed for a lifetime. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. I could hear the rain starting outside, soft at first, then heavier. The same rain that had fallen on the day we met, 40 years ago. I whispered to the dark, maybe that's all love ever is, a storm you mistake for forever. And as the rain tapped against the window, I closed my eyes and let the truth wash over me. Everything I thought was real had been built on a lie. And somehow, I was still here. I remember the silence that morning. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. The kind that presses against your chest and makes breathing feel like work. The kitchen smelled of yesterday's coffee and a hint of old flowers from the vase I hadn't changed in days. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the same towel over and over again, not because it needed folding, but because I needed something to do. I kept replaying his words. I only stayed because it was easier. Easier. 40 years, and that was what it came down to for him. Easier. That word carved itself into my bones like a scar.
For 2 days, I didn't say much.
I just moved around the house quietly, cooked his meals, washed his shirts, smiled when he looked up, even laughed when he told his meaningless little stories at dinner. But inside, I was building something. Not hatred, not rage. Something colder, something sharper. A plan. See, when you reach my age, you stop fighting with words. You start fighting with silence. And silence, when used right, can shake a man's soul. The next week, I started organizing the old papers. That was always my excuse, spring cleaning. He didn't question it. He never did. He'd just sit in his chair, TV humming, his glasses slipping down his nose, his hand tapping the armrest as if life still owed him something. In the top drawer of the study desk, I found it, the envelope from our lawyer, the one that detailed our joint accounts, property shares, and insurance policies. I'd signed it 40 years ago with blind trust. That morning, my hand hovered over it for a while. My fingers shook as I unfolded the paper, and the edges felt rough, old, like my heart. And that's when I saw it, his claws, hidden among the lines. A quiet little betrayal in black ink. If either of us passed away, the entire estate, including my parents' inheritance, the house I grew up in, the land my father bought with his bare hands, would transfer fully to him. Not shared.
Not split with our children.
Just him. I felt a cold wave rise in my throat. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not this time. He hadn't just stayed because it was easier. He'd stayed because it was profitable. That night, I made him his favorite, pot roast with sweet carrots, mashed potatoes with extra butter. He smiled, surprised maybe, thinking I was forgiving him already. "You're quiet lately," he said. "Everything all right?" I smiled back, soft and slow. "Just tired," I whispered. He nodded and kept eating. He didn't even notice I was studying his face, the same man who once held my hands under the stars, now sitting there like a stranger, chewing through the pieces of my trust. I thought of all those years I'd spent patching his shirts, mending his moods, holding his hand through hospital stays, funerals, bad seasons, bad tempers. I thought of the woman I used to be, hopeful, loyal, blind. Not anymore. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not the same one we'd used years ago. This one was a woman, younger, sharp-eyed, and kind enough to listen. I told her everything, every detail, every word he said, every piece of paper I found. She leaned forward and said, "You've got more power than you think." Her words stuck. For the next 3 weeks, I worked quietly, rearranging documents, making new copies, talking to our son about estate planning without giving too much away. I didn't tell anyone the full truth, not yet. And at night, while he slept, I sat by the window, watching the old oak tree sway under the moonlight. I whispered to myself, "This time, I'm not the fool." Then came the day of the appointment. He didn't know where we were going. I told him it was about renewing our will. He grumbled, as usual, about wasting time on legal nonsense. When we reached the lawyer's office, he looked uneasy. Maybe it was the way I walked, steady, quiet, not the fragile wife he thought he knew. We sat across from her desk. She had the new papers ready. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris," she said. "Yes, that's our name, Harris. These are the updated documents for review. Mrs. Harris has made some thoughtful adjustments." He looked at me sharply. "Adjustments?" I smiled. "Just small ones. For peace of mind." He started reading. Slowly, the color drained from his face. The estate was now in my name. The savings divided into trusts for our grandchildren. The life insurance redirected. The old house under my sole ownership. His hands trembled. You changed everything." I met his eyes, calm, unflinching.
No.
I corrected everything. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The lawyer cleared her throat gently. "You'll need to sign here, Mr. Harris." He hesitated. His hand shook. Then he signed. And just like that, 40 years of power he'd held over me dissolved into ink and paper. As we walked out, he didn't speak. The car ride home was thick with silence. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, gripping it too tight, I just stared out the window, watching the sunset stretch across the sky. It was beautiful, golden, peaceful, like freedom. When we reached home, he stopped me before I got out. "You really think you've won?" he said softly. I turned to him.
No.
"There was never a game. You just forgot that love is an ownership." He looked away, his jaw trembling slightly. For a second, I saw it, guilt, maybe even regret. But it was too late. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting a soft glow over the photo frames. Our wedding picture, the kids' first birthdays, our old Christmas mornings. All those memories real, but tainted now. Still, I felt lighter, not happy but whole. I poured myself a small glass of wine and whispered, "Don't blink now, what happened next changed everything." Because what came after wasn't revenge, it was justice. The next morning, I mailed copies of the new documents to my children with a note. "Never let love blind you from fairness. Protect what's yours and who you are." Later that week, I found him sitting on the porch, quiet, lost in thought. He didn't argue anymore, didn't raise his voice, just sat there, maybe realizing what he'd really lost, not money, not property, but me. And as for me, I finally understood that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it smiles through the tears. That day, I walked past him, the autumn wind brushing through my hair, and for the first time in decades, I felt something new. Peace. It's been almost a year since that day, the day everything changed, and somehow, everything began again. The mornings are quieter now. The air feels different, almost cleaner, though maybe that's just my heart finally learning how to breathe again. Sometimes I still set 2 cups on the table, then I remember I only need one. I smile at the mistake, pour the extra coffee back into the pot, and tell myself it's all right. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without breaking. The house doesn't echo with arguments anymore. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock, and the wind brushing against the curtains. That silence, once heavy and suffocating, now feels like a kind of peace. A peace I didn't know I'd been craving for decades. After the papers were signed and the dust settled, we started living like polite strangers. He stayed in the guest room for a while. There were no big fights, no shouting. Just distance. Like 2 travelers sharing the same inn but headed for different destinations. One night, as I passed by his room, I saw him sitting on the bed, holding an old photograph, our wedding picture. His shoulders looked smaller, his face softer, like he was aging faster than before. I stood there for a while, watching him in silence, then walked away. I didn't hate him anymore. That surprised me. Hate takes energy, and I was done giving him mine. I'd given 40 years already. That was enough. Slowly, I started to rebuild a life I didn't even know I'd lost. I joined a small community group at the library, women my age, each carrying their own quiet storms. We laughed, read books, sometimes shared our regrets over coffee. I told them a few stories, not everything, just enough to feel human again. One of them, a woman named Janice, looked at me one day and said, "You've got such a gentle strength about you." I smiled. Gentle is all I've got left. She laughed softly and replied, "Sometimes that's more than enough." That night, when I came home, I wrote those words on a sticky note and placed it on my fridge. Gentle is more than enough. It's still there. The garden became my sanctuary. The dirt under my fingernails, the smell of soil, the slow patience of watching things grow. It healed me in ways therapy never could. Every morning, I'd step outside with my coffee, barefoot, feeling the earth cool beneath my toes. There's a rose bush in the corner, one my husband planted back when love still had warmth. For a long time, I couldn't look at it without feeling bitterness. But one morning I noticed new buds pushing through. Fragile, pink, and beautiful. It hit me then, life doesn't stop growing, even when love does. So, I decided to care for those roses again. Trimmed the dead leaves. Gave them sunlight. Watered them with my own hands. Not because of him, but because of me. Each new bloom felt like a quiet victory. People often ask me if I ever confronted him again.
If I ever asked why. No, I didn't.
Because some truths don't deserve another conversation. I'd already heard enough. In his silence, in his excuses, in the way his eyes couldn't meet mine that night in the lawyer's office. Forgiveness isn't about setting them free. It's about setting yourself free. And I needed that freedom more than I needed answers. A few months later, he moved out to live with his brother upstate. We said our goodbyes in the driveway. No tears, no harsh words. Just quiet. He looked at me and said, "You always were stronger than I thought." I just nodded. I know. Then he got into his truck and drove away. The taillights disappeared into the mist, and I stood there, the morning air cold against my cheeks. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For the first time in years, I truly breathed. Now, my days are simple. I wake up early, make coffee, feed the stray cat that visits my porch every morning. I read. I write a little. I sit by the window and watch the world move. Slower, softer. Sometimes, when it rains, the smell of wet earth brings me back to old memories. The sound of his laugh, the way we danced in the kitchen when we were young. It doesn't hurt like it used to. It just reminds me of how deeply I once loved and how deeply I learned to let go. Love, I've realized, isn't always meant to last forever. Sometimes it's meant to teach you who you are when it's gone. A few weeks ago, my granddaughter came to visit. She's 16, bright-eyed, full of questions. She asked me, "Grandma, how did you know when to stop forgiving?" I looked at her and said, "When forgiving started to mean forgetting myself." She nodded quietly, and for a moment, I saw a reflection of my younger self in her. All heart, all hope. I hope she never forgets that answer. There's a pie cooling on the counter right now, apple cinnamon, the kind I used to bake for him every Sunday. I still bake it, but now I share it with the neighbors, or sometimes I just eat it alone with a book. That smell, warm apples, butter, cinnamon, it doesn't bring pain anymore. It brings peace. It's funny how the same scent that once reminded me of betrayal now reminds me of survival. Life really does find a way to turn pain into poetry if you let it. Every evening, when the sun sets behind the trees, I sit on the porch with my blanket and cup of tea. The light turns everything gold, and the wind carries the faint sound of kids playing down the street. Sometimes I think about him, not with anger but with distance. I wonder if he ever sits somewhere thinking of me. But even if he does, I hope he remembers the woman I became, not the one he once took for granted. Because that woman, the one who stayed silent, who smiled through pain, who kept believing love would fix everything, she's gone now. In her place stands someone quieter, wiser, unafraid. If I've learned anything through all of this, it's that life doesn't always give you closure wrapped in ribbons. Sometimes it gives you a cracked door, and you have to decide whether to keep staring at what's behind it or walk away toward the light. I chose the light. And every day since then, no matter how small the step, I keep walking toward it. Sometimes I still talk to him, out loud, when the house feels too quiet. I'll whisper, "I hope you found peace." And I mean it. Because holding on to bitterness would mean letting him win again, and I've already done enough of that in my lifetime. Now I hold on to myself, my garden, my stories, my peace. And I think that's what real justice looks like. Not revenge, not punishment, but peace. The kind that doesn't need to be loud or proud, just steady. The other night, I lit a candle before bed, the lavender one I keep for calm. I watched the flame dance, small but alive, just like me. I smiled and whispered, "We made it." The candle flickered gently, as if agreeing. And in that small moment, surrounded by quiet light and the soft tick of the clock, I realized something I wish I'd known all those years ago. You can lose someone and still find yourself. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. Did you feel her pain? Tell me what city you're listening from. I love reading your stories. And if this touched your heart, subscribe and stay with me for more true feeling life journeys. Because somewhere out there, another woman is setting down a second coffee cup and realizing she only needs one.